I'm 23 years old, and in my first month or few weeks of law school, everything's brand new to me. Law school is new to me, but also the world of law at that time was really new to me. I didn't have any lawyers in my family. I had no exposure to what some lawyering might look like. It was all very brand new, all very overwhelming. And I found myself, for some reason, having applied for a summer position at a national law firm. And then as part of that recruitment process, had gone through an on-campus interview, is what they were called at that time. And then the second stage of that was to meet with the recruiting lawyers for dinner at a very expensive steak restaurant in Saskatoon. So found myself at a dinner with 10 or 12 of my first year colleagues and the two individuals that had been sent out by the firm, representing the firm to try to recruit summer students to their offices. The two individuals that had been sent out by the law firm to do the recruiting on campus, I'll use the term bro dudes, that I had ever actually interacted with at that point in my life. Bro dudes in the sense of I know, don't we all know what a bro dude is? But, just wanting to talk about, a lot of it actually was, how much they were earning, what they were buying, that kind of a thing. Lots of talk about different sports or talk about what the firm might do during Stampede kind of activities, how great the parties were, how great the party scene was. And it was as if they had come out of a fraternity house, basically. In that moment, kind of listening to the two individuals that had been sent out, it was very clear to me that this was not a place that was going to be the right fit for me. And there's nothing wrong with a firm sending those type of people out to do its recruiting, and whether or not it was intentional that the firm thought, these are the best two individuals to represent the firm. Send those two out to law schools, knowing that law schools at that time were over 50% female students, whether that was an intentional decision by the firm or an unintentional decision by the firm. And that's just who they, sent out. My friends at that time, we actually paid pretty close attention to who was coming out, who was representing the firms. And it was definitely a plus if at least one of the recruiting lawyers was a woman. Yeah, if she was trusted with that role. That says something about how the firm values its women lawyers and how the firm wants to represent itself. So at that time, it definitely would have been seen as a positive to have at least one of the recruiting lawyers be women. One of my best friends today, I remember sitting at the table and we were having our really expensive steak, and it was a lovely meal, but it just kind of dawned on us that we had found ourselves, whether intentionally or unintentionally, at the end of the table, kind of as far away from the recruiters as we could get. But I decided that since I was there having that steak dinner and I was 23 and a student and sitting with a bunch of undergraduate debt and accruing more debt at law school, that I should take full advantage of that dinner and connect with my friends and order myself the expensive asparagus with Parmesan, I think was a side you could get at that restaurant. Order myself that and make the most of the dinner while fully realizing that this was not going to be a place for me.
What is it like to be a woman in law? It's going to be different for each woman, but we know it can be difficult, complex, frustrating at times, but also incredibly rewarding. On this podcast, we're going to have some honest and candid conversations about what that experience is like. I'm Jen Quesnel, and this is Dear Beth, a Women in Law podcast. And serving as my co-pilot today is the talented Leah Howie. Now, Leah is a co-editor, along with Beth Bilson and Brie Lowenberger, of the collection of personal letters, which this podcast is based on. It's called Creating a Seat at the Table, Reflections from Women in Law. Hello, Leah.
Hi.
So I'm not exaggerating when I say you're talented. Not only are you a lawyer, you teach at the College of Law here at the University of Saskatchewan. You are the director of the Law Reform Commission of Saskatchewan. And little known secret, you have an engineering degree out there too. So are there any other superpowers that I should know about going into this?
I asked my husband about this and I was like, I don't know what I should say. And then I came up with, I'm actually really, really skilled at picking out paint colors. So if you ever have a interior design project,
I actually do.
That. And then on a more meaningful level, I think I'm pretty good at connecting people and bringing people together and gathering people. So.
And kind of getting a read on people, because that was your voice we heard at the start of the show. And reflecting back on that experience you had in law school in first years, would you say things have changed with the culture?
I think that's a slightly difficult question for me to answer from a personal perspective. That interview for me was 18 years ago, and that was the first and last time I interviewed with a big law firm. I would hope, though, that recruiting looks different today. I'd be surprised if many recruiters are coming out to law school today and sending only two men. That would be surprising to me. So my sense is that in the last 18 years, there definitely has been some improvements in the culture, at least in the obvious ways, and the most overt forms of discrimination are likely ending. We have record amounts of women being appointed to the bench. The obvious barriers, I think, are being removed. So, one thing that I think is interesting is that the College of Law at the U of S has been graduating equal numbers of women and men for decades, I think since the late 80s. And I think even now we're slightly more women. I think we're maybe 53, 54% women, but women remain underrepresented in the profession. So in Saskatchewan, of active members of the Law Society, 39% would be women. So, and it's been decades now. That's long enough to have had those women go through and achieve those kind of equal numbers of representation. A 2022 report from the Canadian Bar Association showed that pay equity remains a significant problem in the profession. Sexual harassment and discrimination remains a problem in the profession. Even more concerning is in 2022, there was a comprehensive study on mental health and well-being done for the legal profession, and women were one of the groups that experienced the highest proportion of psychological distress in the practice of law. So, while I have lots of friends who are now partners in law firms and in senior positions in public law and government agencies who enjoy their work and are happy where they are. That doesn't mean they're not still facing challenges or having overcome big challenges. And I don't think those are necessarily going away.
Yeah, I kind of wonder where the underpinnings of that bro culture still sort of might be a little entrenched. And that's also sort of the impetus behind the book, behind Dear Beth, this podcast, and about all the women who wrote for this book. You asked so many of them to write personal letters to their younger selves. What was the idea behind this? What was the inspiration?
Well, the idea kind of came on we like to call them Bria power walks. Bria and I have been working, we don't work together, but we work across the hallway from each other. And we're both the only people in our organization. So we're each other's colleagues and coworkers, even though we don't work for the same place. And we were out on a walk one day, and I remember me talking about how enthralled I was at that time with the Drop Threads series. And I was working my way through those books and just being so inspired by the women who were writing their stories and loving how you could just pick it up, read a little bit, put it down, and finding the stories really impactful and insightful. So I was talking about that. We're always kind of talking about how our women friends are doing, our students, our role models. We talk about these kind of things all the time. And I think I had also watched a video from Betty Ann Hagee, who's a powerhouse from Saskatchewan, talking about storytelling as a form of mentorship. So those were my swirling thoughts. And Brie always has swirling thoughts about access to justice. And she had recently finished her master's on encouraging reflective practice in law. So I think all of those four things kind of swirled together. And then we thought, could we do something like a Drop Threads with women lawyers? And then we thought, that's a great question. We have so many questions and no answers. Who can we get answers from? And of course, the answer to that question is Beth Bilson.
The Beth of Dear Beth.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to invite someone else into this conversation. That's Adrienne Forgeron. Adrienne is featured in the book, and she's worked for big law. She's worked for both the private sector, public sector. She's worked in the healing arts, even served as senior legal counsel for the government. And at this point in life, Adrienne Forgeron is running her own practice called The Gentle Lawyer right here in Saskatoon. Adrienne, hi. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, and for your chapter in the book, you chose the George Eliot quote, "It is never too late to be who you might have been." Why did you choose that one?
That quote honestly has been the guiding light, I think, for my entire professional career. And I think likely until the day I die. I imagine myself as a 72-year-old woman thinking, okay, what's next? What am I meant to be? What am I meant to do? And how do I do that? And so, yeah, that quote really has been a guiding light for me.
Leah and I have a few questions for you, especially after reading the chapter. I know part of it involves you leaving the practice at one point. You left the law entirely.
Yes.
And this is from, like, you were a student, like, you were top of your game for a long time. What prompted this?
You know, that was at the age of 30. I had been practicing for 5 years or so. I had bounced around trying to find the right fit. And it became obvious to me that none of the things that I was trying were working. I had in my mind, I think at the time I probably didn't fully realize this, but in my mind I had a success to-do list, right? And I had, okay, go to university, find a partner, buy a house, get a good job you like, all of these sorts of things. And I had this checklist that I had to accomplish.
Yours sounds a lot like mine, actually. Probably a lot like yours.
Very similar. And by the age of 30, I realized I had checked all of these things off the list. And on paper, I was successful. But deep down, I was very, very unhappy. I was miserable. I thought, what have I done? This is not actually who I am. And so I left the practice of law I kind of blew up my life. And I thought, okay, I think it's clear that I'm not meant to be a lawyer. And that was the conclusion I reached at the time.
Now that I've read the book, I'm realizing a lot of women actually do this. Go to law school, you try practicing, try the right fit. I didn't realize so many women actually leave law. Like, Leah, in your research, how often does this happen? I think there was the 38%.
Yeah, we're 39%. Actually, interesting, Saskatchewan active members of the profession in 2020, we had actually crossed the 40% threshold, 41%. Now we're back down to 39, and I think that's a COVID impact that we're seeing across women working everywhere. So there's extra family pressures, and women were often the ones to take that step back. And I think that is a broader trend as well. Without any stats in front of me, I would anticipate that family obligations, having little kids, can make it really hard, or feel like it's really hard, and make it really hard. Sorry, I shouldn't say feel like it's hard. It is hard. It's hard to manage a family. It's hard to manage a successful career. And sometimes when something has to give for a multitude of reasons, it's often the women that are going to be the ones to do that giving and take that step back.
And even the sense of law in and of itself, that is what I really got out of your chapter, Adrienne. What is the law? What is it that you're practicing? And sometimes I think women and men see it differently.
Absolutely. I think that my recollection of law school, recognizing that, your memory fades and you remember certain things more clearly than others. But when I think back to my law school experience, I just remember, sitting in classrooms and thinking, be stoic, be logical, get rid of all of the emotion and just follow the law or apply the law, learn the law. And I remember thinking, okay, this is how I have to be a lawyer. And I didn't think there was really anything wrong with that. I thought, okay, this is what I have to do. And over time, as I tried to fit myself into this box that I had believed was the only way to be a lawyer, I realized, oh no, this is not me. I am a feeling type of person. I live life to the max, and I don't fit into this box. And what I've since learned is that I'm not sure it's so much masculine or feminine, even since the writing of my chapter. To be honest, looking back, I reread my chapter. I thought, I've learned things even since then. And I think that both women and men can view the profession as this logical kind of in a box sort of way. But there are many men and women who don't operate that way. They're not that way inherently. And so many lawyers are realizing that isn't me and this isn't working. So yeah, it's been, for me personally, been quite a journey of realizing that I don't have to fit into that box, but also I have to do a lot of work on myself to figure out, okay, well, maybe I am meant to be a lawyer, and what kind of lawyer can I be? Who can I serve, and how can I be my best self?
That makes a lot of sense. And for another perspective, I'd like you to hear from Michaela Keat. Now, she's a professor at the University of Saskatchewan's College of Law, and here she's talking about this one disorienting but also pivotal moment that she experienced.
I had just come back from this day in court, and I had head off to the courthouse with this client. We'd spent the day there, and we were walking back to the office. And I remember it was a sunny day in July, and I might have been 22 years old. I had been quite nervous about this day, and as I was walking back with this client, I was feeling pretty good about how it had gone, and it was my first time doing that. So I really felt like I had accomplished something that day. We stopped in the street, and I was just about to say goodbye and send him on his way. I remember the sunbeams, shining down on us, and he said, just completely out of the blue, he looked at me and said, "Don't let it change who you are," and then said goodbye and walked away. I remember standing there feeling quite stunned, like somehow there was this message that was delivered to me that day from myself or from the universe or something. It was such a curious experience. And I think it was that moment that I started asking myself, who am I in this role? Is this me? I think my perspective shifted in that moment from external to internal. I'd been working really hard in the 2 or 3 years leading up to that moment to conform. It was uncomfortable because the mold represents the external vision of the successful lawyer. And when I moved away from that, I felt like I was hanging in a bit of an abyss. And my creative process ended up being a way of coming up with my own vision of what success looked like.
That's the voice of Michaela Keat from the University of Saskatchewan's College of Law. And what's going through your mind as you listen to her?
You can't hear this, but I'm just sitting here listening and nodding.
Yeah.
She summed it up so eloquently, I think.
She always does.
Yes. That was my experience, absolutely. Leah, was that?
I think I maybe had a different experience because for whatever reason, going back to that very first interview, that was October of my first year, and I knew then what I wanted and what I didn't want. So for me, I haven't had a kind of a big moment of crisis or a pivotal moment or a moment of the abyss. As Michaela said, I haven't had that moment, and I'm not sure why, other than I think I had a pretty good handle on who I was and what I wanted to do in my early 20s for some lucky reason.
Well, and don't let it change who you are. Ooh, like if that's ever a message, hey?
Absolutely. That resonates so clearly with me because actually, to elaborate a little bit further, in my particular experience, it was about not letting it change who I am. But the beautiful thing about the practice of law has really been that I have learned, it's really uncovering who I am. It's been gritty, it's been tough, and it's actually helped me figure out who I actually am. So it's kind of the chicken or the egg sort of thing. Is it the practice of law that can change who I am, or is it the practice of law that can help me uncover who I actually am? And I've been lucky and fortunate enough to return to the practice of law kind of time and again because I've realized that it brings such immense gifts.
It does. And I know Michaela talked about trying to fit that mold, and I have another perspective I'd like you to hear. This is from Amanda Dodge, and she's a former legal aid lawyer, currently the program director of the Mennonite Central Committee. Have a listen.
Well, when I started out as a practicing lawyer, it felt to me that I was presented with a few different molds of what it was to be a good lawyer or an effective litigator. And I found those molds to be very intimidating on at least 2 scores. One is, how do I live up to this? Here's the senior lawyer who's just, being so successful, and how can I adopt those characteristics, adopt that style in a successful way? And so that was intimidating. But also, secondly, that style felt like an ill-fitting costume for me. Like when I started to try it on, it was like, okay, I'm trying to be someone else to be successful at this. And several years later, I was sitting down with Mary Eberts, and she's a well-respected constitutional litigator and feminist. And she at the time had the Sallows Human Rights Chair at the U of S Law. And Mary has these really piercing eyes. She was talking about this charter litigation that she was excited to get back to. And she looked at me with these piercing eyes and she said, "I am a warrior." And in that moment, I was impacted in at least 2 ways. One was just witnessing her self-awareness And her celebration of that, she knew who she was, and she did work in which she could flourish. And her style and her gifts were needed in that arena, right? But the second way that it impacted me is that as soon as she said, I am a warrior, everything in my body, heart, and mind said, and I am not. And I think it was because I was inspired by her confidence in her self-awareness that I could be aware of myself and move into self-acceptance. That it's okay that I'm not like her, that I don't have the same style and characteristics that she has, that I have other gifts and characteristics of my true self that I can bring to my work.
That's Amanda Dodge, the program director at the Mennonite Central Committee and a graduate of both Harvard and the University of Saskatchewan School of Law. Adrienne and Leah, what's going through your minds when you hear that?
I mean, Amanda is such a brilliant, compassionate woman, lawyer, advocate. I think it was really interesting when she said, I am not a warrior. And I would have actually said, but I think you are, in a different way to Amanda, which is also really interesting. But I appreciated her being able to recognize so clearly in that moment that that's not me or how I perceive myself to be or how I want to be in this world, and that's okay. And now I can do something different. And that's such a critical thing for us all to be able to recognize, and also to be supportive of other women who are warriors and are doing things differently, and that's amazing for them, and we don't all have to do things the same way.
Well, to have somebody look right at you and tell you they know what they are. Adrienne, for you, I mean, how do you figure out what you are? Sometimes it's in opposition to something else, but how do you sort of uncover those values that are at the middle of you, especially when you might be changing from when you first applied to law school?
It is a journey, right? The uncovering. And I love what Amanda said. And I actually didn't expect her to say that, that full knowing that she wasn't a warrior. And I think that's beautiful to say, oh, okay, well, who am I really? If somebody knows themselves so well, it's inspiring to me to say, okay, well, who am I? Am I a warrior? Am I not a warrior? Who am I? And I think for me, it's fantastic to realize I am all of these things. This is who I am. I am somebody who is so many different things. And it's been a journey of acceptance of the many facets that is Adrienne Forgeron. And I love that about myself. And I think it's very exciting to me because I think, okay, well, I've been a lawyer for 13, 14 years, something like that. And what am I going to do for the next 13 or 14 years? And I know that I'm not the type of lawyer who's going to be in a role for longer than 5 years. It's just not who I am. And I love that about myself because it keeps me honest, it keeps me real. And what it does is it keeps me present. One of the greatest gifts that I have received as I bounced around all of those different jobs was this moment of looking back and saying, I wish I would have been present, even when I knew it wasn't the right fit. So the third bounce, I'll call it, in that first 5 years of practice, the third bounce, I got to that job, and within 2 weeks, I knew it was not the right job.
Okay, what was the job?
It was for a uranium mining company.
Okay.
And I realized, oh no, this is not a right fit either. It was that moment of dread of thinking, oh no, it's not the job, it's me. And I was there for a year and a half. And I spent the year and a half trying to figure out my exit plan and what I was going to do and where I was going to go. And looking back, I wish I would have accepted that I wasn't going to be there. I knew I wasn't going to be there for very long. And I wish I would have seized the day. I wish I would have soaked up the knowledge and the wisdom that the lawyers at that workplace were willing to share with me. Instead of being so caught up in the future and where I was going to go and what the right fit was, I wish I would have really been there. And I wish I would have looked at those uranium sales contracts and thought, what can I learn from this? What can I do with this? And that was a huge lesson for me because now in my life, now I know I'm unlikely to do anything for a long period of time. And so here I am now. I'm the gentle lawyer. And I don't know. I don't know how long I'll be the gentle lawyer. I don't know how long I'll have the name. I don't know. But it really causes me to think, okay, today, here and now, what can I do as the gentle lawyer?
I love that, Adrienne. Something else I really appreciate about your story. So Adrienne graduated 1 year ahead of me in law school, and I've been friends with Adrienne on Facebook since Facebook started, probably in 2006, because we were in law school when Facebook started. And I've been, following along with Adrienne and watching her journey, and so inspired by everything she's doing. And I think one of the most inspirational things about Adrienne is your comfortability with moving on. And I think sometimes as a culture, in so many contexts, we get way too worked up in the idea of quitting as being a failure. Yeah. When quitting can just be I need to stop this. I'm ready for something new. And you've been so able to do that, which is really inspirational, because I think a lot of lawyers feel like they need to stay in their lane, stay in the place they've been the whole time, because quitting would look like failure. I mean, the same thing can apply to our relationships. It can apply to a whole bunch of things, but you've really shown or lived that moving on can be a success, a happy choice, and the right thing to do.
It's not a waste of time. It's not like a sunk cost that, oh, no, now what am I doing?
Absolutely. And that's a narrative that I've had to work through. I thought, oh my gosh, I've quit again. And I think, what is wrong with me that I have left this job again? And I am proud to say I'm a professional quitter, and I am totally okay with that. And I love that one of my strongest skills is realizing the moment when I need to go.
So, Adrienne, I know some of the work that you do is teaching, actually. So do you have any advice for law students or young lawyers on how they can sync up their values with their career so they can live more authentically and be true to themselves? And I work at the College of Law and teach a lot of students, and I would say this is a question that's on a lot of their minds.
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I wish somebody would have, sat me down in a course when I was in law school. So well done, Leah. This is amazing. I think it's a two-step process. I think the first step is understanding and knowing yourself and what your values are. And I think it's an ongoing thing, but becoming really clear on what is important to you, what those values are to you. And then the second step is realizing that there is a way to practice law that is in alignment with your values. So instead of shifting who you are and maybe bending your values to fit in somewhere else, it's being patient and respectful enough of yourself to realize that the right opportunity is out there somewhere for you, that your values will line up with legal work that is needed somewhere in the province or the country or the world. Now, you may have to work for big law or do whatever you need to do to pay off the debt and to kind of get your foot in the door, and there's extreme value in that because it really builds your legal skills. But know that eventually, if not right away, there is a way to practice law that is in alignment with your values and not the other way around.
And tying back to what we talked about before, it's okay to move on.
It's okay to move on. In fact, get really good at identifying when to move on, and you can't help but succeed.
Yep, absolutely. I got to say, there's this excerpt in your piece where you say, law is both the right and wrong path for you. Law will make you crumble, but will not defeat you. And you will get it entirely wrong, while at the very same time getting it exactly right. Why did you realize those were the words to live by?
I think it's all about expectations. And I know for myself, when I went into law school, I had great expectations. And I think maybe that's really about life in general, is it's never really what you think it's going to be, but in a lot of ways, it's so much better.
I love that. I'm so glad you joined us today, Adrienne. Thank you for coming in. Adrienne Forgeron runs her own practice these days. It's called The Gentle Lawyer, and you can find her here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And hey, Leah, thank you for joining us here at the podcast, and we'll catch you back here soon, right?
Yes, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm joined now by another co-editor of Creating a Seat at the Table, Beth Bilson. Hello, Beth.
Hello.
I should probably explain, you are the Beth in Dear Beth. You're the one that we named this podcast for, and that's because you've been a faculty member here at the College of Law at the U of S since 1979.
That's right.
You've served as Dean of Law, as Dean of Education, as the University Secretary. Now, did you ever imagine you'd become Dear Beth or Ann Landers?
No, it was a surprise.
In terms of the book and just what it took to put this together, what comes to mind in terms of the why behind it? Why was this important?
Well, I was part of the first class in law school that had a significant number of women. There were 30% in my class who were women in 1974. And that was coming off a period when women were in law school in ones and twos. I mean, there really were very few women in the classes ahead of me. So I've always been interested in how women are faring in the legal profession and observing some of the changes in how the legal profession operates with respect to women. And it's, I've taught a lot of women students, obviously, and been concerned for their welfare. I have a daughter and a daughter-in-law who are both lawyers, and I, of course, had hoped the world would be transformed by the time they were taking their place in the legal profession. But I think this was a chance to hear from a range of women from different periods, women from different professional settings, women who'd made a lot of interesting choices, and just to hear their thoughts about how women are doing in the legal profession.
Well, and your students do stay in touch with you. They do write you emails. They do call you.
They do.
Dear
yes.
Beth is a thing. And so, Beth, I think we should probably explain that in each podcast episode, we'll dive into the mail and read a letter from one of our listeners. This one comes from Tatum Sully. Here's some of what she had to say. To be honest, I'm extremely concerned about my future career aligning with my personal ethics and values. When I imagine practicing areas of law I'm not comfortable with, it gives me a great deal of anxiety. However, I do recognize there will be situations in which I will represent an individual whose case may not match my own value system. While I don't actively hope for this, I often remind myself that this career is one in which I must advocate for others and for their needs. Beth, what would you tell Tatum?
Well, I think a number of things. I mean, I think in terms of individual clients, individual cases, I think the point that is made there that there is an obligation on lawyers to provide services to clients and not to judge their clients. There is an ethical obligation for lawyers to represent clients to the best of their ability. So I think in terms of squaring your personal values with the values of your client, you need to be careful about how judgmental you're going to be about a client. That's not to say that if you're part of a law firm which represents a corporation on an ongoing basis, for example, and you have some serious issues with the way they conduct their business and so on, that you can't sort of make some decision about whether that's the best setting for you to be in. But I think going back to what Adrienne talked about, I think if you want to find a professional setting which is one that's compatible with how you want to practice law, you have to work at it. I'm always surprised that law students don't seem to feel they have any agency in figuring out their path forward. I think Leah's story about going to a recruiting dinner kind of underlines that. They seem to think they're going to wash up at the doors of some big law firm and everything will be fine, without kind of thinking, what do they want to do? What do they want to spend their energy on? What do they want to spend their time on? I mean, they only have one professional life. So I think they need to kind of consider what more thoroughly what the options are and where they might belong, and not to give up at the first reverse. Like any labor market, you're never going to get your dream job on the first outing, and you need to learn what you can from the places that you work. The other thing is, I think there are always opportunities. I mean, I certainly never had much of a career plan, but I have been offered opportunities to do really interesting things. I was asked to be chair of the Labor Relations Board or university secretary. I thought that's really absurd. I mean, who would ask me to do that?
Smart people.
But in fact, they were very rewarding opportunities. And I think you have to be ready for those. I think you have to think beyond what your normal kind of career trajectory you might have looked like when you started your little plan about
Be ready to take the detour.
where you're going to go. Yeah.
Well, and Tatum also has a specific question for you. She writes, is it realistic for a junior lawyer to refuse to work on a case for ethical reasons without repercussions? I ask this because at the start of a career in law, it seems to me that one has to sacrifice many things in order to move up or gain respect in a legal workplace. And I imagine many young lawyers may be pressured to bill hours regardless of their personal values. Is this true, or is my perception inaccurate?
I think it's somewhat inaccurate. I'm sure there are instances where junior lawyers are put under stress because they're asked to work on cases or projects that they don't feel comfortable with. But I think law students should be prepared to find that most lawyers are concerned about ethics. I mean, most lawyers do think a lot about ethical practice and try to practice law in a way that is kind of compatible with ethical obligations. I mean, unless you feel, capitalism is fundamentally evil and therefore you shouldn't be in the service of any corporation. I think having corporations, which are big institutions, run on an efficient and humane and ethical basis is important, and lawyers play a role in that. So I wouldn't be quick to suppose that lawyers are going to ask you to do unethical things. I mean, I think there is a public perception of lawyers as being kind of shady and sneaky.
Okay, that's from Better Call Saul.
And yes, exactly. But I think, my experience of the legal profession is that most lawyers are very conscious of their legal and ethical obligations and try to kind of operate within that framework.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's good advice for Tatum and for all of us. Thanks for joining us on the Letters segment.
It was a pleasure.
And if you have a question for Beth or something to say about anything you hear on the podcast, drop us an email, createjustice@usask.ca. That's it for this episode of Dear Beth. We record and produce this podcast on Treaty 6 territory. This is the traditional and ancestral territory of Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota nations, and it's the homeland of the Métis Nation. And we pay our respects to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place. And we're grateful to be able to have these conversations and to tell and hear these stories here on Treaty 6 territory. And we do that recognizing our own privilege, being mindful of how we can use our voices and this podcast to give diverse voices a platform. We also draw some inspiration from Maria Campbell, who tells us that stories are a way we can talk to each other without having barriers between us. Our team here at Dear Beth is Leah Howie, Bree Lowenberger, and Beth Bilson. Hannah Jorgensen's our associate producer, and Wayne Giesbrecht is our tech. This podcast is produced in partnership with the College of Law at the University of Saskatchewan. Dear Beth is a production of Cascade Communications. I'm Jen Cannell. Thanks for listening.